Well, greetings, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of the City Council, and members of the public watching this presentation. Thank you for the opportunity to present information about our two-year budget for the police department. There are several things that I want to cover. That'll be these topics, but I'm going to use some different slides to talk about the detail for them. One of the things that we did as an emphasis in preparing our budget was to find ways to provide more service to the community without adding a significant amount of cost. We have been actually rather relentless in asking the council for support to add back the positions that were lost in 2002. At that point, the staffing of full-time officers was reduced from 24 to 18, and since then, the council has, in the last few years, listened to our requests for additional people and, using some of the information in the post-study, granted us the authority to add a few positions starting back in 2013-14 and 14-15. The first set of adjustments came when we turned in the money for one of the parking enforcement officers and our contribution to the Marin County Major Crimes Task Force, and used those collective funds to add one more officer to our staffing level. And then last year, at the successful conclusion of a grant request to the federal government for a COPS funded police officer position that needed a matching grant from our budget allocation from the City Council, we were able to add what we call Officer 20. So we've gone from 18 to 19 to 20, but rather than ask for 21 through 24, we looked at other ways that we might be able to provide more service with less or the same amount of full-time officers without asking for additional officers, and use some of the personnel we already have. So one of the things that's contained in our general fund is a very small budget item that allows us to provide online police reporting, something we don't have now. We were at first hesitant to do that, thinking that we might be reducing some of the in-person service that our officers provide to the community now. But we've noticed that over the last couple of years, people are actually very willing to call in and make the report on the telephone, and often ask if we have the online reporting option. And it's a perfect opportunity now to do that, because after we've just upgraded our computer-aided dispatch and records management system with the Sheriff's Office, we're going to be adding the online reporting module. So in the general fund, that's worth about $13,000 in the first year just to get it set up, and then every year after that it's another $5,500. So it's actually not a lot of money, but adds a lot of extra service for the community. The other thing not reflected in this chart is that a couple of years ago, the City Council authorized us a sum of $35,000 to pay for a part-time police officer. And that's been working out very, very well for us. That officer spends the majority of his time on the police motorcycle addressing issues that the beat officers are not able to get to. And so this year we've included the request for a second allocation of $35,000 for hiring a second part-time officer. And then in addition, we asked for another $25,000 to help us with an emergency services planner position that would then take away some of the workload from one of our 4 patrol sergeants. So those monies are included in our budget under salaries. The other thing here on this chart is the addition of a parking enforcement officer. You can see that we had 4 back in 2012 and 13, and then we gave one up to help fund the officer, what we called Officer 19, and then we were down to 3. And we've been using 3 since the last couple of years, but we believe now that with a 4th parking enforcement officer coming on, that would also be trained along with the other remaining 3 parking officers to be community service officers. In addition to parking enforcement officers, they could provide service to the community in the form of taking cold reports, responding to some basic traffic accident scenes and helping with those, and also doing some entry-level crime scene investigative work. And so by having one more parking enforcement officer to our fleet here of people, we believe that the person would add a lot of service, but the basic salary of the parking enforcement officer would be paid for primarily by the citations that they write. So none of the 4 parking officers would be doing that work full-time. It would be all 4 of them doing a combination of parking enforcement and community service work throughout the 7-day work week, which we currently staff. So here you'll see that for 2016-17, 17-18, we've added the position, so we went from 25 to 26. So that one full-time body person is the parking enforcement officer. The rest remain unchanged. Just pointing out, though, where it looks like we went from 10 officers to 9. If you look a little further down where it says officer investigator, we're really staffed for 2 investigators, which are both officers. It's just an assignment. It's the same amount of bodies altogether. So it's not that we would drop any positions there. And this reflects actually what I think is the stability of the budget for the police department. Of course, there's some changes in salary and wages and benefits and such, but our basic operations, supply and services accounts are fairly stable, and we've just made some minor adjustments for costs that we know are going to go up for dispatch services and a few things like that. So we have some extras that we would like to request, and we feel strongly about 2 separate requests. That the first one's for body cameras, and the second is for license plate readers. They're just in this order, but actually body cameras is our second of the 2 choices. We have 2 ways of doing the body camera request. One is for a method that has cloud storage, which for a 5-year expense is $185,000. Option 2, which is a lot less money, is $95,000 over 5 years, but would require at the end of 5 years the likelihood that we would have to replace the server that we would buy in the first year. We believe that this could be our second year request, depending on what kind of money is available, not necessarily in year 1, but in year 2, because we'd like to have the license plate reader camera money come first. So read a lot about body cameras and the need for law enforcement to have that. And we agree, but we don't believe it should be our very first thing that we need if there's money available. We have an extremely low citizen complaint rate. We have good people that work here. They're trained well and equipped well. And in the last couple of years, we might be averaging maybe less than 1 a year citizen complaints, which is rather remarkable and doesn't really justify adding the expense now at this point. If the money's available, sure, we would do it, because it also adds the ability to have the actual evidence feature of body cameras for our criminal prosecution cases. So that's about body cameras. The license plate reader option is, as you can see from the first slide, is very, very expensive. And it's come up before in the last couple of years, and at the time we just couldn't justify the request of $500,000 for license plate reader cameras. So we went back to the drawing board and asked our 2 vendors to come back and offer other choices other than this. And so they did provide a option 2 and an option 3. We're going this backwards now on purpose. A 1 location installation would cost approximately $48,000. The trouble is we have 6 places we need cameras. And so wherever we put 1, and what kind of benefit would we get out of it? We think really not very much. In fact, for that, I'd rather not do it. For option number 2, we could get 3 locations, and each location is typically 2 cameras. On one of the Bridgeway installations actually would require 4 because of 2 lanes. But a middle of the road option number 2 would cost approximately $132,000. So that would get us the north end of town, the south end of town, and Spencer sort of right in the middle. If we had an awful lot of money, this is what it would cost to put license plate readers everywhere we need in Sausalito. So here, we believe we could use this installation to help us decide if it's really worth the $500,000 for a full 6 location installation. And having this in place for, you know, a year or two would help us decide that. There's a lot of factors that go into this, and we actually had the vendors come on site to help us with it, because so many things are involved besides just the cameras. And it's the, you know, actually the electricity to run the cameras, the storage, and, you know, how much, you know, trenching do they have to do to install them. It's very complicated, but we didn't want to come to council with the number that was too soft. So we think this is a pretty good number for us to use. So those are our two, you know, extra requests of council: license plate reader cameras, and then body cameras. And if body cameras came in year 2 of the 2-year budget, we would be okay with that as well. So I'm sure there'll be questions about this at some other time, but I appreciate you listening and look forward to having the opportunity to explain in more detail. Thanks.